I think it's pretty clear that I love Geometry Dash. It's a super easy game to learn, it feels great to play, and there's always a new challenge to work towards. But despite that, I can't help but feel like the game is getting old. There's only so many levels to try, and I just wish that there was some way for members of the community to create and share their own ones, so I could finally play something different. Well, it's a good thing I learned about Geometry Dash Thundershock. It's got 3 brand new levels, no editor access, 1 new icon, and 0 mechanics that didn't already exist in the normal game's editor. I downloaded it from a sketchy link in someone's video description and had to disable my antivirus to play it. But it'll be a lot of fun, right? Wait, what the? Hi there. What you just saw is what we Dashers like to call a Geometry Dash fan game, or fan-made spin-off, if you will. It's a trend dating back to early 2.1 where people would pitch their own Geometry Dash spin-off games in the same style as Geometry Dash Meltdown or SubZero, which, if you don't know, are separate apps with 3 original levels that totally could have been in the main game, but that doesn't make as much money. Although these spin-offs present themselves as fire or ice themed versions of Geometry Dash, that's not really the case. Rather, the levels just focus on using new features and block designs introduced in the latest updates. The biggest selling point is simply the fact that they were made by RobTop, the creator of Geometry Dash, and although he doesn't compare to some of the insane creators in this community, I think everyone can agree that RobTop still has one of the most unique styles in all of Geometry Dash. Instead of thinking outside the box, he uses most objects and tiles exactly for their intended purpose, and yet he still finds so many clever ways to bend the rules and subvert our expectations. But more importantly, his level design flows so nicely. Everything in a RobTop level works, almost everything in a RobTop level works perfectly with one another, and it just makes for a super simple yet unique experience that everybody yearns for, but nobody actually tries to replicate. And that's where these fan games come in. For most franchises, people make fan games and ROM hacks because they love the original work and want to expand on its ideas with their own twist. Some of the best developers out there, like Toby Fox, even got their start this way. But Geometry Dash is a little different, because what's the point of going through all that trouble when there's already a level editor? Well, I think it's just about presenting your levels in the same way RobTop does. There's a certain charm to seeing them appear on the main screen instead of the editor, and just packaging everything in the style of a spin-off since you can't normally do it. Obviously, the levels themselves are still going to be made in the editor, along with any custom gimmicks or mechanics. Because are you really going to go through the trouble of modding in a custom orb when you could just do this? I guess what I'm trying to say is that Geometry Dash gives you full control over the levels you build, but it doesn't really let you touch the menus, and some people want to play around with that. Nowadays, we've got some pretty insane fan games that completely flip Geometry Dash on its head, whether it's a mod for the original or something made from the ground up. But they're a lot more well known in the community, so I wanted to do a video where we look back at the older stuff and see how it evolved into the awesome projects we know today. More specifically, the big wave of fan-made spin-offs in 2018 that followed the release of SubZero. But who knows, maybe I'll cover the modern stuff in a future video. So, after some extensive research, the first real Geometry Dash fan game that I could find was made in March of 2017. To give you a sense of time, 2.1 had been out for 2 months, Geometry Dash World released a little before that, and the current top one was Yatagarasu, which could be seen from the Demon List website that did not exist until a month later. Around this time, there were plenty of existing fan-made images and sneak peek recreations, and maybe a few small scratch projects, but nobody was really bold enough to make their own standalone game. That is, until someone named NiceRed uploaded Geometry Dash Story Mode to GameJolt, a completely original fan game made in GameMaker where you explore the wonderful yet full of danger world, the Geometry World. Let's give it a shot. Okay, I don't mean this as an insult, but why does the game look so much like it was made in Scratch when it wasn't? Oh, that's a really good sign. Look, I know this seems shady, but it might still be really good. I learned that from pizza stores. Let's hop into Stereo Madness. Wait, this might be fire? Well, that wasn't very sight-readable. I mean, it's what you'd expect from an early Geometry Dash fan game. For what it's worth, the physics are pretty good, and the level design is average. Men! Where? Too close. Try again. Okay, I might have to take back what I said, it's a little rough around the edges. But you know what, the charm is definitely there. Someone took a lot of time to make this when they didn't need to. There's a few more interesting ideas as you continue to play, but nothing too groundbreaking. NiceRed also released a couple other fan games around this time, but they mostly just copy and pasted from each other, and the playability certainly varied. I don't feel like covering all of these, but hey, if you're watching this, NiceRed, you might have actually made Geometry Dash history with these. Surprisingly, aside from those games, I couldn't find any more fan games released in 2017. But something a lot more interesting would happen on December 12th when RobTop would share this image to social media. More money for Rub. Geometry Dash SubZero didn't actually come out until over a week later, but just the existence of this image changed everything. Because if there's Geometry Dash Meltdown and now SubZero, what other themes might RobTop choose in the future? Well, only one day after the announcement was posted, a pretty well-known artist named Jobet decided to pitch their own idea on Twitter and Reddit. You've heard of Geometry Dash SubZero, now get ready for... And before we knew it, Patient Zero was unleashed. Even though this was just a fan-made image, a certain credible individual actually covered it like a news story, in a video that now has over 1 million views. It was really just talking about the SubZero announcement and then ending it with, by the way, here's a fan-made image, but it's fake. That being said, the existence of this image planted an idea into many people's heads, and while some people simply photoshopped their own fan-made images, others decide to take it a step further by making videos. Unfortunately, most of them are lost to time, but I do know that there were a lot of fan-made showcases that were really just existing featured levels edited together. By the end of January, the trend was mostly reduced to clickbait garbage, but then, out of nowhere, in came Lemons with Geometry Dash SkyBound. So, SkyBound is a collection of 5 levels all made by the creator Lemons, some of which already existed and some of which are brand new. Technically, it's not a real fan game since it only exists as an edited video on YouTube, but the idea is that it could have been. What I really like about this video is that while it starts as a traditional showcase, the second half is a developer commentary where Lemons talks about each level and the decisions that went into them. It makes the project feel a lot more genuine and shows that it wasn't done for clickbait. Like I said before, some of these levels weren't made originally for SkyBound, but Lemons claims that he made everything over the span of a year when he first had this idea. So like, around when GD World came out. You could argue that this is a little cheap, but I think it's cool seeing a creator compile their own levels into this perfect little package. Plus, they all kind of have their own history. For example, the first level, Smashdown, had its entire building process documented in a video where Lemons makes a RobTop styled level. It's a good watch, but honestly it's not very RobTop aside from just using his colors and block designs. I think there's a little more that goes into his style, especially from a gameplay standpoint. But it's not a bad level by any means, it's a lot of fun to play. Level 2 is another RobTop styled level, and this one was built specifically for the fan game. Apparently it only took 30 minutes to make, and it wasn't even uploaded to Lemons' account. Gameplay's fine, but that's about all that's going for it. Level 3 is an extended version of Beast Mode from GD World, and it came out only a few weeks after it. It reuses most of its ideas before turning into a mashup of styles from other spin-off levels. This one is probably the most RobTop styled one in terms of both gameplay and visuals, and it kind of contradicts Smashdown, which he said was his first attempt at the style. And then the last 2 levels are just existing ones, though they were polished up a little bit and in some cases shortened. They're fun levels, but a little fast and visually intense, so they feel out of place here despite standing well on their own. The final one is an unrated easy demon, which I appreciated because RobTop is too much of a coward to do it in one of his own games. I don't really mess with the asymmetrical dual parts though. So, that was GD SkyBound, probably the first fan-made spin-off to have original levels made for it. Lemons' video did amazing and now stands at over 1 million views. I really like the ideas overall, but definitely think that it could have benefited from more consistent theming and a bit less recycling, even if it means doing 3 levels instead of 5. They don't have to be RobTop style, just anything that feels different from an ordinary custom level. But I'll cut Lemons some slack since it was still January, only a month after SubZero came out. There was still plenty of time to work on something even better. Geometry Dash Chaos was uploaded by the MDK only 2 days later. Now I know what you're thinking. Yes, these promo images will get funnier as we go on. Look at these guys, they're so silly. I know these are technically better icons than what SkyBound had, but like... Also, please don't bring up the font choice, we're past this now. So, GD Chaos is a showcase of 3 original demon levels that racked up about 400,000 views. That being said, there's not much I have to say about it, partially because it's hard to watch in this quality. They're definitely not RobTop styled, aside from some block designs and somewhat similar ideas. And more importantly, they are absolutely not demon levels. For some reason I could only find level 2 uploaded to the servers, and yeah, it's just okay. It's like 3 to 4 stars with pretty uninteresting gameplay, and although I recognize the charm and passion that went into it, it's probably not something I would send under today's standards. And I could say the same about the other levels, but I'll give a bonus point to the last one just because it has this silly little guy. So yeah, it's not great, but it's still an original fan game, and that was enough for people to be supportive of it. Also, 3 days later they ran it back with GD Timeline, shout out to this icon, and this one was a little more unique because it actually used the 2.2 features from SubZero. Unfortunately that version of the editor was still brand new, so the level itself is more of a gameplay test than it is something actually polished. Also, levels 2 and 3 are just random featured levels with 0 credits, so it kinda loses my respect. You might recognize the second one from the Spike Gauntlet, which was released when this video was made. So those were the more notable games from January, but far from the only ones, because by the end of that month, all hell had broken loose. You could not go anywhere in the GD community without seeing a thumbnail for some new spin-off that didn't actually exist. Some of them had original levels like SkyBound, but the vast majority of these were coming from content farms, and people were extremely fed up with it. All they would do is find 5 rated levels with a shared theme, compile them into a single video, give it a wacky title, and... wait. It's gauntlets! They're literally just reinventing gauntlets! But here's the catch. Most of these clickbait videos have completely vanished, and the only remaining traces of them come in the form of screenshots and snippets from other people's videos. The best source I could find was C's rant video, which, if you ignore all the anger, is the best time capsule I could possibly ask for. He pretty much documents everything without realizing it. Mainly, the most infamous video around this time was none other than Geometry Dash Razorleaf. A YouTuber named Biohazard just grabbed footage of 3 green demon levels, all of which were nerfed versions with pitch shifted or replaced songs. Then they used Jobet's artwork for the thumbnail, and it blew up. Because thanks to the previous coverage of this game, some people genuinely thought it was a new Geometry Dash spin-off. Also, as far as I can tell, the only surviving footage of this Razorleaf video comes from C's coverage of it. So thank you so much for keeping your GD videos accessible, and I love what you do now. As you could probably expect, people did not like Biohazard for this, especially since they were no stranger to making clickbaity content in the past, like all GD levels in Hell mode. But after hearing all the complaints, they did end up apologizing and taking down the Razorleaf video. And you know what? The fact that they showed remorse already puts them above like most GD slop channels nowadays, so maybe we were too harsh. In the meantime, other YouTubers began to realize that instead of ranting and spreading hate, they could just fight fire with fire. For example, a YouTuber named Electro released Geometry Dash Underwater, which is a parody of the Razorleaf video edited in the same style. This one's lost as well, but there's plenty of surviving footage in C's video. And then after that, it just devolved into chaos. Geometry Dash SD Slayer version by guess who? Turns out he also wasn't thrilled with these games, so he decided to make his own. Level 1, Hydrochloric Acid. Level 2, Nerfed Mechanical Showdown. Level 3, End of the World. Nicely done, SD Slayer. You managed to make something that all guys, girls, and fox spirits can enjoy alike. That's not the end of it though, because Bluey made Geometry Dash Dash featuring Buckle Your Pants, Hungry Humphrey, Love Baba, Don't Rate This Level, and Minions. Like I said, fighting fire with fire. And don't even get me started on Geometry Dash Communism, which somehow completely delivers on its promise. Or Geometry Dash Dab, which is actually a 20-minute skit made by EVW's current editor. We really do have one heck of a community. But through all this drama and parodying, there were still a couple of serious creations surfacing. And considering everyone now had really low standards, they were very appreciated. For example, Lemons made a custom GD World island called Ultra Sector that's extremely well designed and an absolute blast to play. I adore the style of these levels, and more importantly, the ideas they play around with. It was definitely the most legit looking fan game so far, and all the levels were uploaded to the servers. Also, this got like 4 million views. You could argue that it's clickbaity, but when 3/4 of the video is commentary and level building, I think that more than makes up for it. Now, to give you a sense of time, this all took place only 1 or 2 months into the release of Geometry Dash SubZero. And while it would take a little more time for people to make actually downloadable fan games, I think the next step forward was Geometry Dash Biohazard by DePixel Hero, formerly Pixelord. It was still put together with video editing, but this time it was 3 original levels all made in the SubZero editor. And for how broken it was at the time, he did a really good job. The decoration is lacking a little bit, but the RobTop influence is definitely there, in case you couldn't tell by the giant skull harassing you across all of level 2. The camera controls are definitely rough in some spots, but 2.2 has made me a lot more used to it, so I don't feel like complaining that much. You have to keep in mind that these are like prehistoric 2.2 levels, so all things considered, he did great. The gameplay could have been a lot more obnoxious, but fortunately it holds back and actually flows nicely. What's really cool is that these levels are actually playable on the servers, and even have all the 2.2 features despite not being updated in 6 years. Levels 2 and 3 are a little broken since a lot changed between SubZero and 2.2, but still cool regardless. And the first level was remastered entirely with plans to do the rest. DePixel Hero would continue this series over time, and I even think it's still going. That being said, his main focus nowadays is Geometry Dash Nexitron, which is an actual RPG fan game that weaves some levels on the servers between its story. It is a colossal project that's way too big to talk about in this video, but I highly recommend you check it out. I don't think anything fits the definition of a true Geometry Dash fan game more than this does. But back to 2018, where the next big development was the release of Geometry Dash Darkness in late April. And while it's just presented as another one of those fan-made spin-offs, you might notice that things look a little bit off in this one. Well, that's because it's an actual fan game made in GameMaker by BootDark and Deem147. Now, remember when I said that GD Story Mode was the first fan game I could find? Well, I was kind of lying because before that one, BootDark made Fantasy Dash back in like 2016. But it's just weird because I'm not sure if it's meant to be a copy or a fan game. Like, this was uploaded to the Google Play Store despite the stolen music and assets, and I just don't know how I feel about that, so I'm reluctant to cover it. On that note, Geometry Dash Darkness was also uploaded to the Play Store with ads, which I'm pretty sure is a huge no-no, but it obviously didn't last very long. Either way, I'll talk about it just because I think this marks the first fan-made spin-off that was actually downloadable. And I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed by how well it controls. It's not easy to program all of Geometry Dash's physics and mechanics from scratch, but they somehow managed to pull it off. Except for the ship, which doesn't surprise me. But the main selling point of the game was its inclusion of 2.2 features like camera triggers and the swing. The one thing they couldn't pull off, however, was a decent looking block design. I cannot fathom working this hard on a game, only to make your levels look like they came fresh out of the Recent tab. The gameplay is also either really bland or super excessive, but never in between. In the early levels, you'll just be doing simple jumps and flying straight, while the later ones will get super hectic out of nowhere. There's also a handful of rough transitions, many of which are caused by the mirror portal, which they really overused for some reason. The first two levels also use the exact same songs as the first two levels of SkyBound, which is definitely a bit suspicious. But you know what really bothers me? They recreated everything in Geometry Dash, and then proceeded to do nothing that you couldn't already do in the editor. Guys, you're programmers, you could add literally anything to this game. A new orb, a new game mode, some cool effects, and you just didn't? What was the plan here? Okay, to be fair, there is one new game mode, but it's pretty underutilized, mainly because there's not many interesting things you can do with it. A couple months after the release of this game, BootDark took another stab at things with Future Dash, also uploaded to Google Play, with ads, but not for long. This one clearly uses the exact same code as GD Darkness, and the way it expands on things is interesting to say the least, because it does have new portals and orbs, but they're for things that already exist, like changing direction and rotating the camera. To be honest, I actually like this a lot. This is exactly what RobTop would have done in the earlier updates, and if anything, it's weird that we don't have indicators for stuff like this, since they affect gameplay in pretty drastic ways. Anyways, the levels are still fine at best, and they abuse the new mechanics a lot more than the original game did. They're unlike anything you'd see in real Geometry Dash, probably because people know better than to do this. There's more to Geometry Dash than just the Stuff 2.2 ads. BootDark would go on to update this game a whole bunch of times, adding a storyline and platformer mode, and basically remaking the entire thing, which is sort of his signature move. He would also reuse his code for like 100 more fan games, ultimately leading up to Final Dash, which I covered in GD Copy 7. I'll give him this, BootDark is super passionate about what he does, but I just think that he's way too hyper-focused on copying exactly what Geometry Dash does, when he could be taking inspiration from it to make something new. There's just not much reason to play this when Geometry Dash is right there. As far as more experimental fan games go, NachoBit released the alpha for Geometry Dash RetroFunk in the summer of 2018, a little after GD Darkness. I gotta give a quick flash warning for this game just because, well, that's one of its biggest gimmicks, for better or for worse. RetroFunk has all the basic Geometry Dash stuff like spikes, orbs, and portals, but as you can probably see, it gets a little funky. Being made in Unity, it takes full advantage of 3D rendering and uses it for some pretty cool effects. In fact, the gameplay is really easy, but the difficulty comes from making sense of it while you're being distracted with crazy effects. Which is very intentional, because unlike Geometry Dash, the core idea of this game is not jumping over spikes, it's keeping track of the spikes while the screen does stuff like this. It reminds me of like those crazy not ITG mod charts. But here's the thing, it just doesn't do a good job with this idea. Yes, the visuals are awesome, but a lot of them are completely unfair or obnoxiously flashy. Not to be the guy who rants about sight reading, but if this is the gimmick for your game, it should be one of the top priorities. It doesn't mean you should be able to beat all the levels in one attempt, but when you die, you should definitely be able to identify your mistake and learn from it. Overall, I'm super on board with the idea of the game and love how it looks, but you have to be really careful with its execution, especially because a mistake sends you back to the start rather than just docking points like a rhythm game. With some better balancing of the effects and a bit more separation from Geometry Dash, this game could have been insanely good. The game was updated over time and eventually dropped the Geometry Dash from the title and even added a level editor. I have no idea how to use it, but that takes a lot of work to implement. Sadly, the servers are down now and the project hasn't been touched since 2022. And the last time I checked, they were just trying to port existing Geometry Dash levels into it instead of doing something original. Nowadays, Nachobit works on lower level programming projects and was a sound designer for the game Dream Core. Heading back to normal Geometry Dash, there was a pretty big development in July when Absolute released a tool that lets you change the main levels of the game, and it actually modifies your copy of Geometry Dash to do this. While most people just use this to mess around and turn Back on Track into Bloodbath, a couple realized, wait a minute, this is just ROM hacking for Geometry Dash. Which brings us to Geometry Dash Dungeon, an actually downloadable spin-off thanks to Absolute's main level customizer. As far as I can tell, this is the first game to do that, but if I'm wrong, it's at least the most notable one, racking up almost 3 million views on Partition's channel. It was made by Robotic24, who's made a lot of popular levels and seems to really like the shopkeepers. This is the game's menu, and as you can see, the levels weren't the only thing that was tampered with. While nothing in the game was modded, there's a crude texture pack that changes a few buttons and removes the editor one by setting its size to 0. You can still get in with a controller, but all the buttons are invisible and nothing loads. The file that handles achievements was also changed to support the new levels, but there's 0 custom icons and trying to open the menu crashes the game. GD Dungeon released with 5 levels, with 3 extra ones being added on Halloween. They're all short or medium length, a little longer than GD World on average, but otherwise the same idea. And they all use tracks by Kaixo Music. Most importantly though, these levels were not uploaded to the servers, meaning you had to download this game even though it only changed the menus. Fortunately, they've been unofficially re-uploaded by some people. They also might have been in a private server, but I don't know for sure. So, are the levels good? Well, they're interesting. There's some very small hints of RobTop style throughout them, but for the most of it, they just present themselves as early 2.1 looking levels. So even though the levels all use different block designs, they still give off the same vibe. They're tied together by a strong emphasis on darkness, with all the edges of the screen fading to black like the lens circle shader. Visually, all these levels are definitely rate-worthy, but it's not quite there with the gameplay. Don't get me wrong, they flow well, but you can tell that they were untested since there's a lot of weird, awkward, and unfair sections throughout them. I've definitely played worse, but if you're gonna make me download an entirely new game, I have to raise the bar a little. The first couple of levels are definitely the strongest and most RobTop-like, but it was nothing that impressed me too much outside of some fun toggle orb usage. Also, level 5 is this silly showdown against Cytobor, which comes out of absolutely nowhere, and I think that's kind of funny. It's just your average, poorly telegraphed boss fight, although I do like how the attacks are pulled from their own stock in the background. And I like how I accidentally got the shopkeeper pop up when I died. After enough dodging, Cytobor goes bankrupt and the level just ends. If you ask me, that's kind of peak writing. This would do numbers on Nexus's channel. There's also level 7, one of the Halloween ones, having this weird creepypasta theme with stickmen hanging in the background. It's too short to explore the idea in any interesting way, but it definitely exists. Honestly, I'm not really sure what this game is trying to be. Despite everything, this is still one of the better fan games. I had a lot of fun playing through these levels for the first time, even if they were unpolished in a few spots. It's just a creator doing their own thing, and I think that's awesome. Obviously, my biggest complaint is that these weren't officially uploaded to Geometry Dash. I understand why they didn't do it, and I love that they were the first ones to pull off a fully custom game, but in retrospect, it's a weird thing to force since there's no custom menus or icons or anything. Okay, we're approaching the end of 2018, and by this point, the fangame craze had definitely died down. There were still new ones showing up, but nothing that broke the formula enough to cover in this video. Except for one. Because there was a secret project cooking throughout all of 2018, and it was hosted by none other than Manix. Back in February, when Fangames had a pretty bad reputation, Manix was one of the creators who took notice of the trend and decided to fight it by making something actually good. So over the next month or two, he would team up with some friends to make 7 RobTop-styled levels that were all beyond feature-worthy. Then he handed them off to Fred the Dolphin to verify, and he really took his time with them because it took until December. That is 9 months after these levels were conceived. Wait, that came out wrong. Anyways, this is Geometry Dash Deep Space, officially released on Christmas of 2018. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, don't you mean Deeper Space, the project Manix released in 2024? Then you might want to try and put 2 and 2 together. Yeah, unlike Deeper Space, which was a massive hit, this one kind of flew under the radar. Maybe it's because the fangame craze had died down, or maybe it's because it just wasn't promoted that much. But it's a shame because there's some bangers in here. One of the more unique things that Deep Space did was upload all the levels to a brand new account specifically tied to the project. I really like this idea because it keeps the levels accessible to everyone who owns Geometry Dash while still making them feel like they exist in this isolated game. There's no special app you have to download because this account is basically that. As you can see, the levels go all the way up to Insane Demon. 2 are unrated, 3 are featured, and 2 are epic. They were all made by Manix, except for level 3, which was made by Fred the Dolphin, and level 1, which Platnu made. That one also appears last because it got auto-deleted from the servers, and when it was re-uploaded, it was picked as a daily level, and I think that's really funny. What's most interesting about Deep Space is the way the levels progress. The easier levels have the most traditional RobTop styled gameplay by a long shot, while the harder ones aren't afraid to lean into the custom level side and break every rule. But on the other hand, the early levels have a more generic 2.1 visual style, while the later ones are super RobTop inspired. And this is interesting because while every level has some RobTop touches, they never let themselves get too constrained by its conventions. Every level borrows a couple things that Rob does well and then goes in its own direction. It creates this vibe where everything feels brand new, but when you watch her play it, you can always pinpoint one thing that clearly comes from a RobTop level. And hopefully all this footage shows you exactly what I'm talking about. When I played through the levels for myself, I had a lot of fun, but I will admit that each one was a little less enjoyable than the last. They all look great, but it very quickly devolves into fast-paced technical demon gameplay with a few rather questionable decisions sprinkled in. Fred even openly said that he despises the gameplay in the last level, and that's probably why it took so long to verify. Also, Manix thought that this medium demon would be 7 stars, which is pretty funny. I kinda gave up once I reached the demon levels, but I might come back to some of them since they seem like genuinely fun projects once you practice them. As much as I like the smooth gameplay of the easier levels, I don't think they were quite as memorable just because they left all the more creative gameplay gimmicks for the harder stuff. I probably would have enjoyed Deep Space more if the levels were easier but still played around with funky ideas, but I can't really complain because Deeper Space would perfectly deliver on that. Overall, Deep Space is definitely worth checking out, and it's fun seeing how far you can climb before getting absolutely destroyed by the harder levels. It's easily the most polished fan game I covered in this video, but that doesn't mean that the other ones didn't have their own charm. Also, there's a lot of really creative coin placements across the levels, and that's obviously going to win me over. In my opinion, Deep Space marks the turning point for when the quality of these fan games gets really good, so I think it's a good place to wrap up, because as far as I'm concerned, the rest is history. As time went on, people would continue to make fan games with varying degrees of success, and most of the lower quality clickbaiting was long gone. In 2019, we got GD Toxic by Black Red, which was another downloadable game with 10 short levels. It was kind of lacking visually, but there were a few fun ideas throughout it. They would go on to make a whole bunch of other fan games like GD Alloy in 2022, which did numbers on Partition's channel. 2022 also gave us 3 by Deluge Drop, which was a massive hit just because of how well it executed everything. I'm sure you've seen tons of videos on it already, but I highly recommend the original devlog for it. In 2023, Geometry Dash Breeze by Andrexel took the community by storm, with levels that were so RobTop-like that people thought it was an actual new spin-off. The fame is extremely deserved though, because every level is super charming and a ton of fun to play. The same could be said about GD Blizzard by Genomorphosis, which is built off of SubZero and uses the new 2.2 mechanics in ways that honestly didn't suck. Considering how broken the editor was back then, this was pretty impressive. That year, Ella Manubis also announced the game Dash for Your Life, which got a lot of criticism for just being Geometry Dash with the forced indie horror stuff that 10-year-olds seem to like. But he actually took this to heart and is working on improving everything. RobTop even told him that it's okay to make as long as it uses its own assets and, more importantly, has a strong hook that differentiates it from Geometry Dash, which is a super cool thing to hear because I think it's what all fan games should strive for. 2023 also gave us Geometry Dash Razorleaf, but for real. A creator named Eplacentra decided to make proper original levels for the game since everyone else just stole existing ones. They're pretty good, nothing incredible, but I do like the theming. And then after Update 2.2 came out, we got GD Deeper Space, which was phenomenal, but we also entered a new era of fan games where you could download them directly from Geode, and they would completely transform your game without affecting your save file. Genomorphosis and some other creators teamed up to make Geometry Dash Lunar, which on top of having new levels and icons, also has new characters and even a vault. People kinda slept on this one, it's got a fantastic lineup of levels. And of course there's Geometry Dash Odyssey by Switch Step and more, which is an absolute beast of a fan game. Not only does it have some of the best levels I've played in a long time, but it's got a fully overhauled level select page with comics, secrets, shops, vaults, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. The whole thing is a massive love letter to MDK, and I highly recommend it. And if you're looking for a fan game separate from Geometry Dash, there's Famidash by TFD Soft, which is a demake of Geometry Dash that runs on an actual NES, and they're still continuing to push the limits of it. Or, like I mentioned earlier, there's Geometry Dash Nexatron, which has one chapter out and looks so promising. So, in conclusion, started from the bottom, now we're here. Once upon a time, fan games were just a cheap way to get clicks on YouTube, but despite that, there were always a couple of people who saw their potential and continued to push their limits. Now, fan games are a really cool way to express your creativity by tying multiple levels together and adding your own twists, themes, or even stories. And maybe you'll confuse a few new players along the way, but they have to learn that lesson one way or another. Obviously, these games vary in quality quite a bit, but as far as I'm concerned, if you're doing it as a passion project, you shouldn't worry about that. Everyone starts somewhere, and if you have the motivation to make one of these, you're already on the path to becoming a better creator. Behind every goofy looking logo and crudely modified client is someone who just wanted to make something cool. Once again, if you're interested in a video where I cover some of the newer games, I'm sure I'll have plenty to say about them. But I wanted to shine some light on the lesser known origins so we could appreciate how far we've come. In the meantime, I gotta get back to Geometry Dash Thundershock because it just told me that my PC has a virus.